Hey Bookish Babes, and welcome to the 12 Days of Vlogmas, Day 10. For those who don't know me, my name's Rainey and I teach music and I also read all types of books. You'll probably hear my son in the background. I read thriller and horror mainly, but I also read fantasy, romance, sci-fi, nonfiction, all the stuff. So if you're interested in that, please like and subscribe to my channel as it'll really help my channel grow. I'll really appreciate everyone that's been following me as we've been doing Vlogmas for the past 10 days. If you have missed a couple days or you just landed onto my channel and you don't know what Vlogmas is all about, I've been sharing 12 different videos over the last 10 days so far on like all different types of book things, like my goals for the year and what my favorite books were and all that sort of stuff. And so I will link the playlist under here in case that is something that you are interested in seeing all of the days as well. And we are in the middle of my 4-part series where I talk about my most disappointing books, my most surprising books, my worst books, and my best books. And yesterday we talked about the worst, and today we're going to end it with a bang with the best of the best, my top 10 books of 2022, and some honorable mentions because I couldn't not talk about some of these other books that I read this year that I thought were pretty standout in my opinion. So get excited. We'll start with honorable mentions, and then we'll just go from number 10 all the way to number 1, which probably isn't shocking if you've watched me in any period of time at all. Alright, here we go. So I have 6 honorable mentions for you because, like I said, I had about 53 5-star reads this year. That was one of my videos in Vlogmas where I talked about my 5-star reads for the year. And so I had a lot of books to contend for the top 10, and it was really hard to whittle it down. So these are 6 honorable mentions that they served a special place in my heart. They just didn't make it to the top. The first one is Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. I loved this book. It was a modern Carrie retelling with a black main character, and it was so good. I just picked up another book by Tiffany D. Jackson because I loved this book so much, and I'm excited to read more from her. But if you have not read this yet, it's perfect for like spooky Halloween October vibes, but honestly, I would read it at any time. It has a podcast element, and it was fantastic. Another book that I could not put down, that I loved the entire time, was my friend Ren Montgomery's newest book, Monsters Are We. And I love the cover. I've shown it before. It's quite beautiful. This one, I can't really give a lot of details about because I don't know what to say, like what's a spoiler and what isn't. But let's just say there's vampires, other types of monsters, and it is really, at the heart of it, a family and how they pulled through some pretty horrific events. And like I said, I read this very quickly. It is a little bit of a chunker. It's about 500 pages, but if you're interested in helping a self-indie published author, then please go check out my friend Ren Montgomery's book, Monsters Are We. You will not be disappointed with this decision. A romance that made its way onto this list that I absolutely loved, but I just couldn't put it in the top 10, was How to Fake It in Hollywood by Ava Wilder. I read this over vacation with my family in the car for a couple of trips, and it was just so perfect. So it's about this girl named Gray Brooks, and she basically wants to keep her career afloat now that the end of her long-running teen soap has ended, and she ends up agreeing to her publicist's scheme to fake a love affair with a disgraced Hollywood heartthrob. And so it's this guy who he is disgraced and sad because his best friend, like his partner in crime for like writing movies and stuff like that, passed. And so he's struggling with a lot of grief throughout this book. And I just loved their whole dynamic. I loved how it really is hitting on grief and how it comes in waves and how it affects everybody differently. And I really enjoyed seeing their love story unfold within the pages of like them having to deal with all of this. And it was just great. I loved it. And I definitely recommend it. It was just a cute, perfect little romance. Then I have a very good for her sapphic energy thriller, and that is They Never Learn by Lane Fargo. I read this year finally. It's been on my list for a while, and I'm so glad that I read it because it was so good. This is about Professor Dr. Clark, who basically searches for the worst men at the university and kills them, like a good for her energy. But she almost gets found out with her last victim. And then half of the story also follows this current university student, Carly, who's trying to survive her freshman year. And her best friend is assaulted at a party, and she becomes obsessed with making the attacker pay. And so, like, you follow Carly for part of it, and you follow Dr. Clark for part of it. And I loved this. I did not see the end coming. I thought it was fantastic. Like I said, it is very good for her energy. You cannot help but root for Scarlett the entire time. And I definitely recommend this if you're looking for a good, no-nonsense, dramatic thriller. Then one of my first introductions into like extreme horror, but I wouldn't say it's really extreme horror. I'd just say it's more extreme gore, and I read it because of Miss Haley. That is Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. I loved this book. I had such a blast with this book. It's very much sister dynamics. It's about Claire and Lydia, and they are They are not close anymore. It's been 20 years of them being distant because of something. Neither has recovered from the disappearance of their sister Julia that happened 2 decades earlier. Then, 20 years later, Claire's husband is murdered and a little girl disappears, and they wonder how this all ties together, and they have to reunite again to figure out what happened to their sister, what happened to Claire's husband, and what happened to this little girl. And it does have some very dark content matter, so I wouldn't recommend this to everyone, especially if you're not into like torture and other things like that. I mean, not that I'm into that, but I can stomach that. But it was so good, and I loved learning about Claire and Lydia. You can't help but root for them both and hope that they are able to reunite together as sisters, and it was just a great time, and I was not expecting any of it. And the last honorable mention on this list is, of course, Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, because I'm obsessed with Miss TJR, and I loved this book so much, but you have to have the audiobook. If you don't, there is no point in listening to this or reading this book. It is basically about a Fleetwood Mac style band, and you follow them from the inception to the breakup and beyond. And it has interviews, and it follows each of the different characters like Daisy and Billy. They have a Hulu or Netflix adaptation coming in March, which I am so excited about because it looks so good and they cast the characters so perfectly. But there's also songs in this, rock and roll vibes like drugs, alcohol, bands on the road, groupies, sex, scandal, all the things. And I just loved this book so much. I honestly probably want to reread it again because I had so much fun with this book, so I couldn't not mention it in the honorable mentions section. So one more time, these are my honorable mentions. They didn't make the cut, they almost did, but now let's get into the good stuff. Let's talk about the top 10 of 2022. You will probably hear my son. He is running in and out of this room. I cannot help it. It is what it is. All right, coming in at number 10 is Verity by Colleen Hoover. And I know this is a hot take because Miss Coho is just, you love her or you hate her. I don't know where I stand with her, but with this thriller, I very much stand for it. This one deals with Lowen, who is a struggling writer on the brink of financial ruin, and she accepts the job offer of a lifetime from this guy named Jeremy Crawford. He's the husband of the best-selling author Verity Crawford. He hires Lowen to complete the remaining books in her series because she suffered a horrific accident, and when she goes through all of Verity's stuff, she finds this manuscript, and she starts reading it and realizes, holy crap, Verity is actually insane, and do we believe this manuscript, and can I finish this series? Like, what have I gotten myself into, essentially? And this book was wild. I've mentioned this before, but this is one of the first and only books that really triggered me as a mom because Verity does some truly horrific things to her children in this book, and I could not condone it. I could not get behind it. It was honestly really terrifying, but you had to keep reading because you had to know how it was going to end. And it had twists and turns. It has a lot of sex in it, which I was not expecting, and I did not particularly enjoy that part of it, but the plot itself was insane, and I honestly... the question that is asked at the end is, are you team manuscript or are you team letter? Because there's a letter at the end, and I am a mix of both. I believe there are parts in the manuscript that are true, parts of the letter that are true. I'm like one of the, like a special breed because I'm not common with that answer. But this was fantastic. So if you're wondering if Coho is for you, maybe her thrillers are. I haven't read Layla yet. That's her paranormal romance. But this was a hit for sure. Coming in at number 9 was, of course, one of my queens, The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. I read this for Haley Hughes Book Club, and I read it in like 2 days. It was fantastic. And I really loved the podcast element in this book. I do feel like podcast elements are being dramatically overdone, like within the last like year or so, but this one didn't bother me at all. I think it really like added to the story in a really great way. This book is about a girl named Shay and a couple of her friends and how that when they went to college, one of them ends up killing themselves. And a couple of years later, one of the friends has a podcast and he starts insinuating that maybe it wasn't a suicide and that it was actually set up to be a murder in disguise. And he says, if you're listening to this and you were my friend in college, then you owe it to me to help me figure this out. And so of course she goes to meet up with her ex-friend from college, and they go to figure out what actually happened. And this is a very culty book. I honestly love cults, so like this was like definitely for me, but I know it's not for everyone. And this book is dark. This book covers a lot of stuff, especially about female like roles in society and patriarchy and like all of this other type of stuff. And I just had the best time with this. I flung through the pages. Miss Ashley Winstead knows how to write a book, and this is so different than like her campy In My Dreams I Hold a Knife book, which I also read this year and loved. This is like nothing like anything else I've ever read. So if you think you can handle this very dramatic and traumatizing book that is also just so good and keeps you like hooked on every single page, then please read it. You will not regret it. Number 8 is controversial. However, I've talked to people about it and I feel secure in saying that I like this book. And I'm going to explain in a minute. And that is Hidden Pictures by Jason Reichelak. I read this in a day, y'all. Like, it was so fast paced. I could not put this book down. It was that much of a killer. So this one is about a girl named Mallory Quinn. She's fresh out of rehab and she takes a job as a babysitter for Ted and Caroline Maxwell, and she's looking after their 5-year-old son Teddy, and they're like this rich hoity-toity couple. She loves this job. She gets to live there, whatever. Then one night, Teddy starts drawing more sinister pictures, and she's wondering, is their house being haunted by ghosts? And of course, the parents don't want to believe that because like they're like, oh, she's probably just like back on drugs or like whatever it is. And there's actually a deep, dark secret at bay. And it has creepy drawings that get more creepy and creepy, like, as the story goes on. Let me find another one. This one's pretty weird. And the pictures really add to it. So, like, if you're going to listen to this on audio, make sure you have a physical copy as well. The reason this book is controversial is because of a twist. And I've talked to people about it, and I don't think that the twist is being used in the way that people are finding controversial. I think the other issue is that people really just think the end is so outlandish. And yeah, it is kind of outlandish, but I was here for it and I absolutely loved it. This book took me on a ride and a journey, and I was not expecting any of it. It is so fast paced. It is just, you have to know what happens at the end, and I'm very much here with what happens for the end. So if you can get past this and suspend your disbelief, because this book like does not have anything believable happening in it at all, then I think you might really come to enjoy this. And like I said, it was just a time. Coming in at number 7 is the only romance that managed to worm its way into the top 10 books, and that is Delilah Greene Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. And I actually just picked up the sequel, Astrid Parker Doesn't Fall, because I'm so excited to read that. And then she has a third one coming out. Like, she is just gracing me with all of this fantasticness. This one follows Delilah Greene and how she is the stepsister to this girl named Astrid, and the mom has always been awful to her, and she's never had a good relationship with any of them, and she moved away and she's a photographer. Well, she gets hired to be Astrid's photographer for her wedding, and so she has to come back to her hometown, Bright Falls. And then she ends up meeting up with this girl, or like hooking up with this girl named Claire Sutherland, who she doesn't realize at the time who she is, and she is one of Astrid's best friends and is in her wedding, and they end up having this relationship. And Claire is a single mom in this, and then Delilah is just, you know, the cool bad girl photographer one. And I loved their relationship throughout this. I loved the fact that they actually were like together for most of the book, and they didn't just get together at the end. I loved how it talked about more than just their romance, and it actually focused on like her photographer journey and how she gets invited to like do this gallery, and she has to like come up with 10 pictures that represent who she is as a person. And then also Claire's like single mom journey and her having to like navigate like still being in relationship, like in contact with the dad, and like what's going on with that. And like it hit a lot of hard issues, but also you got to see them together, and it was steamy and spicy, and it was just the perfect little clever and steamy queer romance, basically. And I had so much fun with it. I'm so glad I read it. I read it super quick. Like I said, I cannot wait for the sequel. If you are looking for like a fun romance that like also hits like actual like, I don't know, real life topics and like goes for more than just the romance of it all, this book is for you. Coming in at number 6 is an author that I am just starting to love. I've been reading some of her backlist this year and her newest books, and she is just a true icon, and that is Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier. And this one I read in a day as I was waiting to get this tattoo right here, this woman empowerment tattoo. I read it in like an entire sitting while I was waiting there. And this one is about Angela Wong. She's one of the most popular girls in school, and she disappears without a trace. Nobody hears from her again. Not her best friend Georgina, and not Kaiser Brody, who was close with both girls. 14 years later, her remains are discovered in the woods near Georgina's home, and they find out, Kaiser finds out, he's a detective now, that Angela was a victim of Calvin James, which was Georgina's boyfriend at the time. And so basically you find out that Georgina may have known what happened to Angela and didn't say anything, so she went to jail. So then she gets released like 14 years later, and new bodies start to turn up, and she wonders if like Calvin is actually still out there and what is going on. There is a twist in this book that you might not be here for, but I was, and I was not expecting it. And when it happened, I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And I just loved it. I loved this book. There's certain books that the way they are written just really works for me, and this one just did. Like, I had so much fun with this book. I loved the different scenes between like her being in jail and then her being out, and like I wasn't really there for like this like kind of romantic relationship that was happening between two characters in this book. Like I didn't really care for that. I thought that was kind of like whatever to the plot. Sorry, I got distracted. My son painted his nails with Sharpie, so I'm gonna have a hell of a time getting that off. But this book was crazy and wild, and I had the best time with it, and I'm just so glad that I got to experience it, and I cannot wait to read the rest of Jennifer Hillier's books. Alright, coming in at number 5 is a book that I absolutely loved this year, and I read towards the beginning of the year, and I probably will reread it because I love a good evil kid trope. And that is The Push by Ashley Audrain. As I mentioned, it's about an evil kid. So it's about a girl named Blythe, and basically she feels that when she becomes, she's not really sure about becoming a mother, but she figures it'll just work out when she becomes one. And she doesn't end up feeling the way she thought she was going to feel with her first child because there's something off about her. She's an evil child. And her husband just doesn't believe her because she doesn't act the same way to the husband as she does to her. She has her second kid, and she feels what she's supposed to feel. And then some tragic thing happens, and Blythe has to try to convince her husband that their child is more evil and sinister than she appears to be. And of course, the husband doesn't believe her, and it's just intense. And it's about how motherhood is nothing like you hope. And it basically gives you all your hopes and fears of motherhood. So if you are a new mother, or you're becoming a mother, or you are a mother and you don't think you can handle that, then don't read it. But it was really, really good to read. It honestly just reminded me, oh, my mom has been reading it apparently because she has stuff in here. It honestly reminded me of the Bad Seed, which if you've ever seen that movie, then it's basically like the Bad Seed incarnate. And I had so much fun with this. I read it in like a day, and I can't believe this is a debut by this author. I cannot wait to read other books that she is releasing, so I hope she releases another book soon. But if you are all about evil kids and seeing where like this sinister child takes them through this journey, then please read this book. Coming in at number 4 is the only fantasy on this list, and that is Jade City by Fonda Lee. And I read this all the way back in January, and I knew it was going to make this list because it is just near and dear to my heart. This fantasy series is my favorite by far, although I haven't read that many fantasy series. I'm trying to get more into fantasy this year. This one is really hard to explain, but it's basically about how Jade is like this energy or this resource that it has been mind traded, stolen, and killed for, and green bone warriors get to wear Jade. And like the more Jade that you have, the more powerful you are, but not everybody can wear Jade. Like it makes you go crazy if you're not actually trained to wear Jade. And there's this war going on between the two rivaling clans over who gets to run the Jade Empire, basically. And we follow one of the clans in this empire. It is so good. It took a while to get past all the world building and understand what was going on, but you really fall in love with the characters, and there are some tragic deaths in here. Like Miss Lee does not care about killing people that you hold near and dear to your heart. And this book was just so good. And I read the second one, Jade War, and I loved it. Not as much as this one, though. And I can't wait to read Jade Legacy and get my heart broken over 5,000 times because that one apparently wrecks you. But this was so good, and I just love this series. So if you're thinking about getting into a fantasy series, I would recommend this one because it is so good. And I heard that Fonda is coming out with a new fantasy series soon, and so I will have to check it out because anything that she writes has to be phenomenal because this was everything. Then we have my top 3 books of the year, and these books just solidified their way into it basically right after reading them. And number 3 is The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon, and I know I've talked about this book. I love this book. This is the first book that I've ever read by her, and I'm definitely going to be reading more. I already own The Winter People by her, which I know is a popular one. This one is very much inspired by Frankenstein. I mean, the main character is Lizzie Shelley instead of Mary Shelley. It's great. So half of it follows in 1978, this treatment center in Vermont, the psychiatrist Dr. Helen Hildreth, who is acclaimed for her work with the mentally ill. But she has her 2 grandchildren, Violet and Eric, and she ends up bringing home a child to stay with them, Iris, and she's kind of skittish and they don't know what's wrong with her, and they make this monster club, and before long, Iris comes out of her shell and all of this stuff. And so that follows 1978, like that timeline. And then it also follows 2019, where Lizzie Shelley, the host of the popular podcast Monsters Among Us, is traveling to Vermont where a girl has been abducted and there's a monster sighting in the town. She's determined to hunt it down because she knows better than anyone that monsters are real because one of them is her own sister. And so you're wondering how these timelines are going to intersect. And when you find out the plot twist towards the end, it is wild. And then you have like the last, like the epilogue basically. Oh, so good. I love a good monster book. I honestly do. And this was so good. I loved how it had like different stuff in it. It had like little interviews. It had journal entries. You follow the perspective of Lizzie. You follow the perspective of Violet. You follow the perspective of Iris. You follow a bunch of different perspectives, and this was so fun. I think she does a fantastic job at like timelines and going in between one era to another. Like that is her thing. She's also a big person about family dynamics, and there was very much family bonds throughout this entire book. Like you just loved the like little kids duo or trio in the beginning, and it is just so good. I could not recommend this enough. Like I said, I love Frankenstein, so if you love Frankenstein, you will probably love this because this was so fantastic. All right, we're coming into my top 2 books of the year, and oh, this book was so good. And it is Blood Sugar by Sasha Rothschild. I loved this book. I read it in a day. It was so good. A lot of these books I read in a day, hence why they made it to the top 10. This one is about a girl named Ruby, and she's a therapist that kills people. But she doesn't just kill people. It's more like if they were bad people and there was an easy way for them to die without it directly being seen as a murder. She just helps them along. And she does that 3 different times throughout her life. Then her husband, who has diabetes, ends up dying. And they say that she did it. And she's going to go to jail for that. And she goes, well, I didn't actually kill him, but I killed 3 others. She doesn't say that out loud. Are they going to find out about those 3? And can she get off the hook for not actually having killed her husband? Because she didn't. And you read from her perspective basically the whole time. And it just is so good. I loved the diabetes representation in this, especially because my dad has diabetes. And so, like, I feel like it's very hard. Like, living with diabetes is actually very hard. Like, you're always having to check your blood sugar, make sure it's not too low, make sure you have candy on deck in case you have to have it. Like, there's a lot of stuff that, like, people don't realize. Like, diabetes is, like, very hard to live with. And so I loved the diabetes representation in this. But I also just loved Ruby's mind and getting to be inside it. Like, I just loved the way she worked, the way she operated. Like, I just loved this entire character. Like, she's one of my favorites of the year. This was just so much fun to read. I just had the best time with it. I will say it's not as plot intensive. It's more like story-like, where she basically just explains the 3 different times she murdered people. And there's also, like, her husband's murder in the background. So it's not as plot heavy as it is character heavy. So if you're like not for that, then you won't enjoy this. But I realized this year that I really am a character driven person, because my next book is way more character driven than plot driven, and that drives people bonkers. But this was so good. I cannot recommend this book enough. Please check it out. It is so, so good. And the number 1 book, the book that made its way onto the top 1 spot since May, and everybody knows what it's gonna be, so let's just give you a second to, like, say it yourself. Other People's Clothes by Calla Henkel. This is the moment we've been waiting for. This is where I can rant and gush and rave all about this book, and you can't give me crap for saying it 500 times, because this is the moment. I love this book. This is about Zoe and how her best friend is murdered brutally in college, and to get away from it all, she decides to go with this other girl that she's not super close to and go travel abroad, study abroad in Berlin. And she ends up staying in this, like, sublet by this well-known thriller writer there named Beatrice Bex. And they spend their nights going through Berlin's club scene and their days hungover, but they feel like they're being watched. And convinced that Beatrice intends to use their lives as inspiration for her next novel, Haley vows to craft main character-worthy personas. They start hosting a weekly nightclub in the apartment, gaining the notoriety that they've been craving. And as the year unravels and events spiral out of control, they begin to wonder whose story they're living and how it will end. So it labels itself as a thriller, but I really wouldn't call it that. Like, there is a thriller in this, and the very last page is like, holy crap, like, it all comes together. But it's very much more character-driven and just kind of focused. It's more of a not even coming of age story, but just like the main character coming to terms with the fact that she is bisexual and being okay with that, and like her journey through like self-discovery and all sorts of stuff like that, but also with like a thriller on the side. And I loved this book. I cannot say enough about it. It worked for me. It does not work for everyone. I've had a couple of friends read it, and some have raved, put it 5 stars, some put it 4, one put it 2, and you know, we're just going to pretend that didn't happen. But I love this book. I just feel very much love in my heart for this book. This book will always be like on my shelf in all its glory because the cover itself is beautiful, and I just had so much fun with it. But like I said, if you are very much plot heavy, you're not going to like this book because it is not plot heavy. It also has like a hoity-toity rich person like atmosphere to it, but like that didn't bother me. Like, it's kind of pretentious in the writing sometimes, but like I just lived for it. So there's a lot of good things going for this book. Like, it's a bad bitch, okay? It's a bad bitch. So I just love it, and I hope that you will read it one day because this is the book. You're going to hear my son. He's right there. But those were my top 10 books of the year. Like I said, I can't believe that I was able to narrow it down considering I had over 55-star reads, but it was just a time. I highly recommend that you check out all of the books that I mentioned. I will link them down below, which books they were, so that you are able to check them out because they are a necessity. And with that, I will hopefully see you tomorrow in day 11 of Vlogmas, where I'm going to be tier ranking all of the books that I've read in 2022. So we have over 100 books, so it is going to be quickly, no synopsis, just go and rank. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!